All right, my friends, we've got a whole bunch of experience with Docker under our belts, so now it's time to move on to the world of Kubernetes. In this section, we're going to start doing a little introduction to the world of Kubernetes, first beginning by answering two very important questions. First off, what is Kubernetes? Secondly, why would we ever want to use it? Now we're going to try to answer both these questions at the same time inside this section, so let's get to it. All right, so to begin, I want you to think back to the Elastic Beanstalk application that we just put together. Inside that application, we had 4 different containers running at the same exact time. We had Nginx, which was forwarding traffic to our server and our client, and then behind the scenes, we kind of had that worker process running as well. And of course, we had a copy of Redis and Postgres running as well, but those weren't really containers that were running with the rest of all of our other containers as well. They were outside services. Now, I want to think about this application, and I want to ask you a very simple question. How would we scale up this application? In other words, if we started getting a lot of traffic and we started having a lot of different users starting to enter in different numbers to calculate the Fibonacci sequence for, how would we kind of respond to that? Well, if I had to take a guess, I would say that it would probably be this worker container over here that was doing the absolute brunt of all the work inside of our application. In other words, this worker process was using an algorithm for calculating that Fibonacci value that was very inefficient. And we very purposefully left it kind of inefficient just to see what would happen if it took a long time for that particular container to get some work done. And so if we started having a lot of users making use of our application, the most critical part to make sure that this thing was working correctly or the entire application was working correctly would have been this worker container over here. Now, ideally, what would have been really nice is if we had some way to easily spin up multiple processes or multiple containers of that worker image. And so if we had like 3 users come into our application at the exact same time, it would have been great if we had 3 different workers, one of each could have been used to create or to calculate a different Fibonacci value. However, this would have been rather challenging to do in the world of Elastic Beanstalk. You see, in order to scale an application by default with Elastic Beanstalk, here's what actually happens behind the scenes. So this is the typical scaling strategy for Elastic Beanstalk. Rather than creating more copies of a single container, Elastic Beanstalk looks at that